Just think like the worst family vacation. Everything's a disaster, or a very hard physical event, and someone cracks a joke, you almost immediately feel a sense of relief. You see this in the team that wins the Super Bowl. Both teams slogged it out. You have to believe they were both at max effort the entire game. Look at the team that wins. They have extra energy. They're jumping all over the place. So it can't be physical energy. It can't be glycogen related. It's not ketone related. It's nothing in the body in that sense. It's dopamine's ability to take that level of norepinephrine and smack it back down. And so we can learn this, right? I mean, I think this is where there's real power, like in your story, or the story that I'm familiar with from your book, like the ability to push through those pain points is something that we really can export to other aspects of life, because it's the same neurochemicals that are involved. So when you get to a particular location, or maybe I recall, a portion where you're feeling lousy, you're injured or you feel like you're hurt, and you can reframe it mentally and think, I'm actually still on the ladder. I'm still holding on to a rung. I know at least that much. I'm still breathing. I know that much. And the lift that we get is not some psychological pump up. It's a neurochemical thing. It's dopamine suppressing norepinephrine and saying, you're on the right path. You can keep going. It's a permission to keep going. And we grant that permission to ourselves. No one grants that permission to us. I think one of the other kind of misconceptions that we want to dissolve is this idea that external rewards can actually propel us down long paths of success and high performance. They can't.
No, that's
internal
an unsustainable fuel source.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a friend from the SEAL teams, and somebody asked us recently, we were given a talk, and somebody said, how can I make sure that I continue to self-reward and I'm not driven by these external rewards? How can I continue to have that drive? And his answer was very good. He said, give away all the external rewards. Now, not everyone can afford to do that.
It's just about you and you.
It's just you and you. And the more attached, there's a famous Stanford study done at Bing Nursery School, probably not far from where you were in the dormitory. There's a little nursery school in Escondido Village. And they did this study where they looked at kids that liked to playing during their recess. It's all recess in nursery school, but they're drawing. And they took the kids that really like to draw, and they started giving them little gold stars on their drawings. And then they like the gold stars for a kid, that's an extrinsic reward. And then they stopped doing that, and the kids stopped drawing. They associated the good feeling of doing it with the external rewards.
Right.
We have to be very cautious about how much of our internal dopamine we attach to external rewards if we want to continue to grow and pursue and focus and work hard. If you just want to get to some place and cash in, then fine. But most people find themselves in a pretty miserable place because their dopamine was so attached to external rewards, they need more and more of that.
Well, the why has to be deeper than that. I mean, the thing that I kind of always default to when I hit that breaking point, or I'm training or I'm racing or whatever, and I'm at that stage where it's just like I can't go any further, the first thing I do is I reflect inward on why I'm doing this to begin with. Like, what is the value system that I'm trying to tap into? What is it that I'm trying to express? Like, what got me to this point? So it's a reminder. And then I just say, well, I'm just going to get to the next lamppost, or I'm going to, get to the next intersection, or whatever it is. I break it down into the tiny, I'll quit after that. Like, the more I can just root myself in the present moment and distill it down into the tiniest of digestible chunks, that's the only way I can, continue to move forward. And I've learned over time that the more I do that, then, suddenly I'll find myself in a different mental, like it will shift, right? Just because I feel that way in that moment is not determinative of how I'm going to feel 10 minutes later.
Absolutely. There's an interesting process that occurs when people start to realize that rewards are all internal. And what they start to do is they start linking this duration path outcome thing to their internal rewards. And so, to put this simply, one of the most powerful things that any person can do is to learn to control this idea of duration path and outcome and attach an internal sense of reward, just that you're doing well. To reward yourself mentally, just say, I'm doing well, I'm actually on the right path. To do that inside of the demands that come from the external world, the more often that we can self-reward some aspect of the process, provided it's in the right direction of what we're trying to achieve, the more energy we're going to have for that, the more focus we're going to have for that. And remember, the reason I say energy, I don't throw that around loosely, is that limiting amount of noradrenaline is constantly being kept at bay. You're literally buffering the quit response. And so when people start realizing that if they set the goals inside of the larger goal and self-reward each one of those, they essentially have an infinite amount of energy to pursue those goals. They have an infinite amount of focus to pursue those goals. You see this most in the special operations community and people that are selected essentially for this process. So one of the things that's been intriguing to me, I have some friends from the SEAL teams, and I don't begin to really understand the real work that they do deployed because I've never done that kind of work. But I've always been intrigued by the selection process, the so-called BUDS process, right? Because carrying logs and getting in cold water and all that, that's not really how the work is. That's really not what the work is about. So the selection process is interesting because everyone shows up fit, motivated, and convinced that they're not going to quit. I mean, I think like there might be a couple people that just show up, but everybody is absolutely convinced. And then a very small subset of them make it through. And I'd be willing to bet that the ones that make it through, of course they're gritty and resilient, but they all are essentially, right? So that's necessary but not sufficient, obviously. Otherwise, everyone would make it through. The people that make it through somehow are able to tap into a process. Maybe it's a reward process. Maybe it's through self-punishment. Maybe it's through self-reward in the positive sense. But they're able to control something inside an environment that is not controlled by them. It's controlled by the instructors. And I've always been struck by the fact that in order to get through, you just have to not quit. Remember, people aren't being deselected. They're not saying, get out of here, you're not good enough, you're not. People are deciding that for themselves. Right. And so it's interesting because it brings about a real world experiment of people who are quitting, and I believe they're quitting because they can't manage these neurotransmitters. And when I say manage, I think that the people that get through, knowing some of these people quite well, had an internal process by which they could reward themselves for doing something that might have just looked trivial to everybody else, but it gave them more gas, more energy. Right? And what's interesting is the process, the kind of unconscious genius of the BUDS process is that they've picked two sensory events that are across the board challenging for everybody. One is cold water, which is great because most of the time it can't kill you, right? It's not like heat, which can kill you. It's cold water and sleep deprivation. And so the ability to do these, like what I'm calling DPOs, this duration, path, and outcome steps and procedures, is great on when you're rested. When you have well fed, well slept, you can do anything. You can be in any hard conversation. You can work through anything. So what they do is they start taking the autonomic nervous system, which is these deep reserves of the nervous system, that when our autonomic nervous system is off, it starts making us pay more attention to how we feel than the demands of the world around us. Remember that basic challenge in the nervous system. And so sleep deprivation is the best way that you can pull somebody down from their ability to analyze duration, path, and outcome and reward themselves. Sleep deprivation is the way in which you essentially pull apart the nervous system and the way that it wants to function, because it's very easy, again, rested, to do all this. But so what they do is they're sleep-deprived people. They put them in cold water. They're trying to get them more in touch with the way that they feel inside than what they need to do in response to the external demands. Right. And everyone I know that's made it through that process did it slightly differently, but I'll tell you how they didn't do it. They didn't do it through sheer grit and determination. They did it through attaching a sense of meaning. They did it by micro-slicing the day, or slicing the day into a series of meals that they just needed to get to, and then rewarding themselves for getting to that next milestone. So they don't know, most of them, probably had very low concept of dopamine and norepinephrine, but that's the process. That's also the process, I think, that allows someone to finish an ultra. I've never run an ultra, but I think that process of self-reward is grit and resilience in a kind of neurochemical definition. Yeah. And I think it's the thing that anybody can tap into. And I think it's so key, because I think people think that it's just so key that people understand, that these circuits are not unique to people who run ultras or people that make it through, stringent filter special operations command. It's the same thing that
It is
anyone could
interesting.
do.
Yeah, the ultimate determinant isn't your physical conditioning, and yet that's what everybody focuses on. It's what's going on in internally, mentally, neurochemically that's making the difference. And the people that are able to best calibrate that and find these, strategies for managing that are the ones that get through, whether it is an ultra or buds. And buds is like this perfect, it's almost like its own lab, right? For studying human resilience in a certain respect. But you have actually taken some of these people and tested them in your lab, including David Goggins, right? So what do you do when these people visit you and you're like, I'm going to deconstruct you here, figure out what makes you tick?
Yeah, so I had the good fortune of meeting David at a consulting event a few years ago, and I guess I should just say, David, you probably know this already, but he is every bit as intense as he comes across.
Yeah, I mean, what you see online is exactly, it's exactly
what you see is what you
right.
get. Really wonderful and obviously extremely impressive human being. So he, little David anecdote. So the night before we had this event, he came out to the lab. My lab, we study fear, we study courage, we study resilience, and we study the underlying neurochemical substrates for those. So we had a bunch of guys there, a couple team guys, some other folks, and we bring them in this little room and we do virtual reality there. And one of the things that we use to scare people or to generate a sense of autonomic arousal is this experience of diving with great white sharks, which of course you're not in water in the laboratory, but it's very immersive. And for people that are afraid of sharks, it can be quite scary. Not always, but we also have heights, we have claustrophobia, we got something where you can feel spiders crawling all over your body if you're an arachnophobe. If you have a pain point, we find it.
Do you spend time trying to figure out what that pain point is?
We do, and we do it through some very covert methodology that involves AI and some fun tools.
A bunch of weird questions that, right, all right.
Let's just say this, from the moment you step into our laboratory, we're studying you. So
now I know.
And yeah, exactly. So what was fun was, so I sort of explained what the platform was and what we were going to do. And David said, he goes, I don't like sharks. And I was like, all right, well. And so then, this was not a typical experimental day in the lab. So I just kind of, at one point I finished describing what the tech is and how we're going to wire people in. And then I said, so who wants to go first? And he's like, I'll go.
Right, of course.
And what was funny to me at that moment, I realized this is interesting because he was very explicit about the fact that he didn't like sharks. He was very explicit about the fact that he was going to be first man in. I mean, it would be inappropriate for me to describe his data, right? And we didn't do a full-blown experiment. But what I can say is whatever it is that David has figured out how to do, it clearly involves taking whatever adrenaline pulse he feels and understanding something fundamental to biology, which is that adrenaline response was designed to move us, not to keep us stationary. He uses behavior as the way to shift sensation, perception, feelings, and thoughts. He understands how to run that program in the right direction. Whereas most people, when they don't like what they feel, they start negotiating sensation, which will never work. They start trying to control their perception, which is hard, right? They're like, oh, I'm not going to think about that, or I'll think about it differently. Very hard to control the mind with the mind. He knows that's a tough one.
Yeah.
Feelings, Lord knows what those are and how to control them. I mean, we'll eventually figure that out as a field, but thoughts are complicated. So he just goes immediately to action. Immediately
right
to
towards
action.
It. So when he says, just for clarity, when he says, I don't like sharks, he's basically saying, put me in the shark tank. Like he's cueing you to say, this is the thing I'm afraid of, and I'm going to be the first one to volunteer, and I know you're going to put me in the shark tank if I tell you that.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think, and I obviously can't speak for him, but one of the things I think is very clear is that he's tapped into this neuroplasticity process through the door, through the portal of agitation and stress. He's figured out, and this is really the holy grail of neuroscience, is how can I modify my brain? Well, you modify it by placing yourself into discomfort and using that as a propeller to move you into action. And a couple years later when David was working on his book and I heard the book was coming out, I think I saw a pre-release announcement, I texted him and I just said, look, I'm really excited to see your book. And he said, oh, great, thank you. It'd be great if you'd write something about it, like an endorsement. I said, oh, I'd be honored to. I'm happy to. And he said, but I need it tonight.
Right.
And this was Saturday at, I think it was like 10:30 at night when I texted him. So I said, great, well, I'd be happy to. I won't do it now. He said, I need it by midnight. So I sit down, I start writing this thing. And these are short blurbs, but I kind of realized that, you want